Ghostrunner describes itself as a unique single-player experience with fast-paced, violent combat and an original setting. Yeah, okay. That blends science fiction with post-apocalyptic themes. Because yeah, we've never had any other video game that dipped its toes into science fiction or post-apocalyptic themes. And I can't think of any other cyberpunk-themed video games that are violent, highly stylized, and feature characters with katanas. And this isn't even the best vision of the future anyway, where swear words and violence are outlawed.
More importantly.
Anyway, ignoring that kind of ludicrously basic synopsis of the game, how I'd describe Ghostrunner is simple. It's a game with a focus on melee combat, parkour movement controls, and a punishing difficulty. Yeah, you're gonna die a lot in this, for every area of every level for the entirety of the game. And if the premise of replaying short segments over and over, ad nauseum, shaving a second or two off your runtime does not sound like your cup of tea, well, then just stop watching right now. As a result, I'd say that Ghostrunner is not a game for everyone. There's actually some pretty toxic gatekeeping going on around this thing already, and people are losing their minds at the mere suggestion of the addition of difficulty modes. That's not to say it's a bad game, in fact the whole thing's actually pretty awesome and satisfying as hell once you get the hang of it. Just depends on whether or not you've got the patience personally to get to that point. If you're hoping for a game like Mirror's Edge with a katana, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're not going to get that. You'll get the Mirror's Edge side of things, I guess, in terms of the parkour and the movement controls, but I think that's about where the similarities end. What I got out of this experience felt more like a combination of Super Meat Boy and Hotline Miami, where I replayed each section of a level a couple of dozen times until I finally hit that ideal pathway and then made it through to the next section.
So, back to my question.
Ghostrunner seems to really want to cash in on the popularity of that whole trial and error genre of gaming. And that's fine, I mean look, there's a market for that, and there's a lot of people out there who like replaying something over and over until they really master it. And yeah, off the back of that, it is so satisfying when you finally manage to get past a tough encounter. So yeah, look, you will have fun with this thing, but it's really going to make you work for it. What else is it that makes Ghostrunner so hardcore though? Well, I'm so glad you asked.
Now, let's take a look inside.
I mean, for starters, it's kind of simple in the fact that you just die in a single hit. It doesn't matter if you land on rotating blades, fall to your death, or take a laser blast to the face. You go down faster here than leftover pizza. However, enemies also die in a single hit too. Now this might sound easy enough, but they always find ways to change the enemies up, giving them different attack patterns and behaviours. Even though really it's kinda just for show. I mean, the AI in this thing is pretty damn stupid. About the best most of them can do is just move back and forth or rotate to take shots at you. There's an upgrade system in the form of a Tetris game where you kinda rotate blocks and place them on a grid to improve some of your skills, along with unlocking further abilities the more you play the game.
Good.
But the upgrade system is pretty limited in what you can utilize, and the benefits are minor at best. About all I used it for was just giving myself another dash charge. Yeah, and speaking of which, what you'll be doing the most here is running, jumping, grappling, and dashing. Often a combination of all four at the same time. The platforming controls, I think, are easily the best part of the entire game. You can wall run, you can grapple up ledges, hack into structures, which somehow makes them move slower, and slide across the ground to maintain momentum. It's smooth, responsive, and generally it works pretty damn well.
Yes.
There's odd instances though when a jump doesn't reach max height for no apparent reason, and the difficulty spike for the platforming in the final level is the video game equivalent of being sucker punched in the throat. But other than that, I think the parkour and the platforming is a definite highlight. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's pretty much up there. I just wish the default run speed was a little bit faster.
Rely on yourself.
Combat fills up the other 50 or so % of the whole game, and that's where it starts to get a bit intense. You can run around as much as you want to during these levels, but at some point you're gonna have to get in there and introduce these guys to your little friend, the katana. And yeah, just like a cyber ninja to bring a katana to a gunfight. This is where the dash move really comes in handy. Now, dashing also has the benefit of slowing down time, and allowing you to strafe left or right, in mid-air mind you, to avoid incoming projectiles. It's a simple and commonly used mechanic that's going to be put to work more than a middle-aged single mum's going to be on a stripper pole at the local titty bar. So in other words, a lot. Apart from that, you can also deflect certain attacks back at enemies, but the timing for this is really precise. Annoyingly too, if an enemy is moving, the deflected projectile isn't even going to hit them. But again, when you get the hang of this, it does feel pretty badass.
Homes will be shot on sight.
It's a high risk to high reward mechanic because, like I said, you die in a single hit in this thing. Onto the enemies, you've got basic guys that just kind of shoot at you. There's guys with automatic weapons. There's a melee enemy who leaps at you and slams into the ground. There's ninja enemies who have to be parried beforehand. Then another one with an energy shield that protects them from the front. So you got to try to get behind them where they're vulnerable. Yeah, it's a bit of a design oversight on whoever came up with that shield, huh? Then let's not forget everyone's favorite, the emaciated kamikaze type enemies that run right up to you and fucking explode. Because yeah, everyone loves those things, don't they? And look, whoever at the dev team came up with these things should just really take a good hard look at themselves in the mirror. And probably most annoyingly of all, these Metal Gear Rex looking things that fire out this wide ass energy beam. Thankfully, you've got a bit more than just your trusty katana, you've got a bunch of other abilities and powers to give you a bit of a robotic leg up. The first one is Blink. Now, this is where you teleport forward in a straight line, killing everything in your path. The idea being that you're supposed to line multiple enemies up for chained kills, but the only problem is that enemies seldom seem to stand in a straight line. Second is Tempest, which is basically a one-handed Hadouken. And you can upgrade this thing so each time you kill 2 or more enemies with a single blast, it instantly recharges, which I think is downright essential for taking on those little exploding bastards. Thirdly, you've got Surge, letting you send out this large blade of energy that can again target multiple enemies. But again, like Blink, it's seldom useful because enemies aren't exactly lining up to let you kill them. Then finally, you've got Overlord, where you can turn an enemy friendly for a short period of time, and I think I hands down used this maybe twice in the entire campaign. Annoyingly too, these are all bound to the same button on the keyboard. You can't bind them to individual keys, which, you know, would have made using them a lot easier. Plus, they are all linked to the same meter, your focus meter, so you don't even really get to use them that much. Just kind of seems like they're in there as more of a last resort, rather than being a frequently used extension to your basic skills. Let's just say you're not going to be spamming them over and over like the Frost Grenade or the Flame Belch in something like Doom Eternal. On top of those 4, you'll also find power-ups in the levels. One of these is a temporary slow motion, and I mean, why there's just a random spinning hourglass that grants you this power-up, I have no idea. After that, you've got a jumping power-up that lets you leap tall buildings in a single bound for a one-off usage. And then finally, a shuriken power-up, letting you throw out an infinite amount of these things for 10 or so seconds. Yeah, I love the shuriken. Still though, even with all these bells and whistles, this is going to be a game that's going to really test your patience. I said before you're going to die a lot in this thing, and that's no joke. I mean, it's really hard to overstate just how many times you're going to be hitting that restart button. I think my record for deaths during one of the levels was honestly close to 100. Going back and replaying through these levels though after I'd finished the game, I'd then die only maybe a dozen or so times instead, and I think a big part of that is knowing the placement of enemies, which means for a first time playthrough, it can often seem really relentless. A big issue and another cause for this is also the perspective. I mean, in other similar games like Hotline Miami and Super Meat Boy, you can easily see your surroundings and the locations of nearby enemies and incoming attacks. Here though, in a first person perspective, that's a luxury you're not granted. It sure doesn't help either though when hit detection just literally doesn't register. Like attacks that just go right through enemies, or platforming not chaining moves properly causing you to just fall to your death. Or just being killed by something when you shouldn't be. I mean, this sort of thing has no place in a game where you die in a single hit. This bit right here, like what the hell actually happened? It's like I suddenly got teleported into someone's ballsack.
Good.
My favourite one was these enemies that could often attack me through walls when I wasn't even in their line of sight. I mean, come on son.
Good job.
Off the back of that too, inconsistencies with enemy behaviour is also a bit of an issue. For a game that has you repeating sections often over and over, it's kind of odd how enemies can behave in totally different ways each time you attempt it. This clip here is a perfect example, right? Now this robot thing shoots at me sometimes, but then other times it doesn't. If it shoots at me, my only option is to either die or deflect the blast back at it. But if I do that, it blows up and then I can't ride it to the next section of the map.
Just Just look at them.
Yeah, and I meant to say too how I really appreciate how the side characters are constantly crapping on in the background, talking about plot related things while I'm trying to jump over ledges and avoid getting shot. It's like someone trying to give me information on the stock market or something while I'm trying to ice skate. I mean, just shut up.
You need to stop relying on her.
I only rely on myself.
Honestly though, I don't mind the difficulty aspect that much, but one of the boss fights in this thing is one of the most unfun things I've ever experienced in my life. Second only to that one time I got a chest infection or that time when I got food poisoning. This boss fight, if you can call it that, is a climb up a robotic tower that's complete with harmful lasers and energy blast. It's also a fact that boss fights against inanimate objects are always fucking terrible, and Ghostrunner proves that point even more. The other boss fights though are at least a bit better and they work off learnable attack patterns. But the initial problem is that because you die in a single hit, you can really only learn so much information before you're gonna die again. It's this very frustrating process of learning a little bit more about how the boss behaves before dying, then learning just a little bit more until you can finally crack it. There's not even any kind of proper end boss either. It's instead a gauntlet of platforming sections with a difficulty spike that just comes out of absolutely nowhere, followed by a cinematic that you've got no control over. Ghostrunner also isn't a super long game. It took me about 6 hours to finish all up, but it does offer up a whole heap of side stuff to complete, like getting collectibles and achievements if you care about that kind of thing.
All done.
The length of some of these levels though is all over the place, like some of them are going to take 5 or 10 minutes, others upwards of 30 or even 45 and onwards. And I think it also could have really benefited from splicing these up into 5 or so minute fast paced chunks, letting you blaze through them just that much more quickly. The worst aspect of the entire game though, and one that just kills the replayability, are these god-awful cyberspace sequences. I mean, they do look pretty cool, and the concept of jacking into this bootleg system and stealing a bunch of data like some kind of first-person Pac-Man is kinda cool, but it felt like a speed bump on what should have just been a tied-up, faster-paced campaign.
You failed.
They're fine the first time you do them because most of them are where you first unlock your new abilities, but after that, replaying them is just kinda pointless. Having to go through these again when you're replaying the game is a bit of a buzzkill. They're so slow and they completely kill the pacing. It'd be like doing a bunch of laps in a Formula 1 car, then pulling off into the pit stop, then doing a few more laps in a fucking Prius. And it actually kind of turns me off replaying some of these levels, knowing that a lot of them end with these cyberspace sequences.
Great.
I will say one thing though, and that is, my god, does this game look amazing.
I told you.
Ghostrunner runs in DirectX 11 or 12 and you can get some pretty spiffy looking visual effects if you've got a card that's powerful enough to support it. When you reach the city levels and the environment finally opens up, it just looks amazing, with superb use of neon lighting effects, water reflections and colours to highlight these various areas of the map. It just effortlessly pulls off this futuristic city vibe and comes across as a world that seems lived in. There's piles of trash on the street, open for business signs out front the stores, there's billboards, advertisements, and the right amount of pollution you'd expect for a dystopic city. About all that's missing is Deckard sitting at a noodle bar eating a bowl of ramen in the rain. It's just gorgeous stuff and the kind of thing that's got you stopping every couple of minutes to mash that screenshot button. I've seen people on the Steam forums talking about the game crashing and having performance issues, but I gotta say that funnily enough, the stability of this thing is something I've never had an issue with. I ran it in DirectX 11 most of the time and I can't fault it in terms of how it looks or performs. It's a stunningly vibrant and photogenic creation of those rain-soaked cities of the future that we've all seen countless times, but it pulls that whole thing off very well.
I told you.
I mean, if you bought this thing on the PlayStation 4 though, well, then I don't know what to tell you except my condolences. But on the PC, it seems pretty stable. Top it all off with a dope soundtrack, sound effects, and voice acting, and there ain't all that much to fault on the presentation front. I mean, there's no big titty cyberpunk girls walking around in neon pink G-strings, but hey, still a looker.
I died.
Like I said before though, this isn't a game for everyone, and I think it's important to recognise the whole trial and error aspect. This doesn't make it a bad game though, or someone a bad gamer for not liking it. It's like saying someone's bad at board games because they prefer Monopoly to chess. Breaking through that skill ceiling can be a definite turn-off for some people. That end result of finally having the whole thing click is like getting a hand job off someone wearing cactus gloves. So if you are looking for a thrilling, violent, and chaotic parkour experience, well, you are still gonna find that, just only after countless hours spent memorizing the layouts of all the levels and mastering the strategies for dealing with the placements and the varieties of the enemies. And if you think that is something that you can get into, well then pick up that katana, Sonny Jim, and let's get into it. I'll catch you on the leaderboards, bitch.